Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Tin Man Score channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and today we're continuing on with the Chillin' Scares marathon train here. The next one I'll be reacting to is 3 more real-life murder encounter horror stories. I'm going to turn the lights off and move you guys towards the computer screen for you. And let's get this show on the road and in the bag.
When I was as young as 14, I started working at various gas stations in my town. My town was small. Everyone knew pretty much everyone, so the owners wouldn't care if I came in and helped out with stuff like mopping the floors, stocking the coolers, or even running the register at times, all for a small amount of cash. This all took place back in the early 90s in Florida. It was maybe 11 p.m. at night, and I was sitting at my usual spot at a table that was set up along the windows of the gas station. I would generally spend most of the nights at that table reading books and periodically getting up to do different chores. Now, being only 14, I obviously wasn't allowed to be the only one running the store at any given time. It would usually be me and a manager, or maybe another employee or two.
Yeah, because if you're not technically considered an adult, then you gotta have adult supervision around you at all times.
This night, it was me and a guy named Jeff. Jeff was one of the part-time managers, and usually when it was only me and him, he would spend most of his time in the back, which basically left me to hold down the store by myself. This night was no different. I remember sitting at the register when I glanced up. Something had caught my attention that was especially odd. I could see a lady who was walking up our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. Like, there were literally no customer cars in the parking lot. Now, this in itself was weird, as because of where we were located, we would get almost nobody that would walk here, especially not from the direction of the interstate. I mean, the store was practically in the middle of nowhere along a very desolate interstate. Nobody just walks this road. I figured she must have broken down somewhere and was coming up to fill a gas container or use the phone to call for a tow truck or something. After around a minute of me watching her, I realized she didn't have a container in her hands. She then came into the store and looked around for a few minutes. The whole situation just felt off. I remember getting a strange and disturbing vibe from her, just from the way she was looking around the store. By this point, Jeff had come out from the back and was standing behind the register with me. He would occasionally do this when customers came in. The lady then walked up to the counter and started telling us a story about how her car had broken down and that she needed a ride to some town I had never heard of before. Jeff promptly responded, saying that he was working and that there was no way he could take her, as he was the manager and couldn't leave me here alone. That's when the lady turned to look at me, as if to get my response. Before saying anything, I looked back at Jeff, who looked at me with a very cold and hard stare, subtly shaking his head as if to say no. And that was my assurance that I knew that he knew something was off about this lady. Now, before I could respond, she turned back to Jeff and pointed at me, asking if I could take her. Jeff quickly and sternly responded that I was too young to drive, and...
There you go, Jeff. That's a smart manager right there. He's sensing something's going on. I would not trust driving her anywhere. Something's fishy with her.
said there was no way we could help her. I obviously didn't argue with Jeff about his response on my behalf, as to be quite honest, this was completely out of character for him. Jeff was normally friendly and even chatty with the customers, and this further supported the fact that Jeff knew something was off about this lady. The lady, now clearly infuriated, cussed us out and left. As she walked back down the parking lot, I kept an eye on her. I noticed she had stopped at the end of the parking lot, right next to the interstate itself. I also noticed she was now on a phone call and waited for maybe 2 minutes when a car pulled up, stopped right next to her, and let her in as if the car was expecting her. The whole situation was weird, yeah, but I never truly realized how much danger I was actually in that night, until a while later.
What?
Almost a year passed. It was night, and I was in my bedroom falling asleep as the TV was on in the background. I don't know what channel it was on. Possibly some news channel or something. But regardless, something I heard on the TV snapped me wide awake. I sat up to look at the TV and was greeted with the mugshot of a lady on the screen. As soon as I saw her, I immediately knew. That was the same lady that I had been in the store with almost a year prior, and who tried to lure either me or my manager to drive her into town. I was 100% sure that was the same woman. It turns out the lady was Eileen Warnos, who was later convicted of being a serial murderer with a confirmed 7 victims who were all
7?
men. Eileen would lure her victims out into the middle of nowhere, and that's where she would shoot them at point-blank range. What disturbs me most is how close I was to becoming one of those victims myself. From both the way she acted in the store and what I now know about her, I firmly believe her plans were to kill either me or my manager Jeff that night. To this day, I still have nightmares about what would have happened had we done what she said.
Yeah, dude. Glad your manager kind of shook his head and no, like, don't respond to her or don't even go out with her. But yeah, that's one way to doing it. Like, lure people out, ask for a ride, and then you just go ahead and go gung ho, boom, boom. But yeah, I'm glad that manager kind of like nodded her to his employee that no, you should not go with something's fishy about her. But I'm glad they got her arrested and everything.
This happened to me and my wife back in the summer of 2017. We had actually only gotten married a few months prior, and obviously because of the wedding costs, our financial situation wasn't the best. And this made it so that we could only afford a place to live that was super cheap and that would let us pay week to week. But luckily, we were able to find just that in the form of a boarding house in our city. The house was 3 stories and had 4 rooms, with a shared kitchen and a bathroom for everyone. We moved into one of the rooms on the 2nd floor. Now, obviously with it being a boarding house, we had to share with a few other people. The most noteworthy ones being a young couple named Jim and Jennifer, just above us in a room on the 3rd floor. And in the 3 months we lived there, they were the only neighbors we talked to. They seemed similar to us in both age and interests, but we usually just talked to them in passing, or even sometimes on the front porch, where we were all out having a cigarette.
Okay, right there. Boarding house. I'd rather go live in an apartment or penthouse or somewhere that's reasonable price, of course. Because a boarding house, like they said, you have to like share bathrooms and everything. No, sorry.
Though, after a few weeks, we would quickly realize that they didn't get along too well. It started off with small things, like hearing them yell at each other for short durations of time, or hearing one of them angrily leave the house in some absurd hour of the night. But the short fights didn't last long. They would get only longer and louder as time went on. Though, that was until one day. My wife and I were watching a movie, and the whole time the usual fights were taking place just above us. But right as the movie ended, we both noticed they abruptly stopped. Don't get me wrong, it was nice to finally have peace and quiet, but it was completely out of character for them. I mean, this never happened. They would almost never just abruptly stop yelling at each other, especially at this point in the night.
But are they done though? Because they probably playing tricks on you and be like just trying to see if you were listening to them or not, or listening to what you guys are doing. Yeah, now something is really suspicious about that couple. If they're arguing all the time and then all of a sudden they stop, they're just pulling your legs.
Though, even still, we both agreed that we should take advantage of the silence and try to go to sleep. And luckily we were able to. But just for me to be woken up in the middle of the night by my wife, who was shaking me and looking off toward the side of our bed. I was tired and completely out of it. I didn't know what time it was, or why I was being woken up. Out of habit, I turned over to get up. But when I did, I could make out a man standing right next to our bed, hunched over my nightstand going through the drawer. I was in absolute disbelief. After locking eyes, he stood up from his hunched position and proceeded to just stare at me. I sat up on my bed and the guy started backing up slowly. I honestly didn't know if what I was seeing was real or just my imagination.
Attack him!
But after turning on our room's lamp, I realized it was our upstairs neighbor Jim, the same one who was always yelling and keeping us up late. I was a little relieved, but still, why was he going through our stuff while we were sleeping? It was completely out of character for him. After calming down for a second, I said, "Well, what's up, Jim? What are you doing in our room, man?" After a few seconds of silence, Jim responded by asking if he could borrow our car, or if we could take him somewhere. My wife, who was now fully awake, screamed at him no, not after he broke into her room at 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
She told him that if he didn't leave, she was going to call the cops.
Call him!
And Jim responded to this by full-on sprinting out of the room. But not just the room. The dude full-on ran out the front door and down the street in a seemingly random direction. I looked at my wife, and we both agreed that something was clearly off about the whole situation. We figured at this point we had to go upstairs and check on Jim's wife Jennifer.
Oh, don't tell me he killed her.
So we do. We go upstairs, and the first thing we notice is the door to the room was shut, but it wasn't locked. I told my wife we should probably just leave her alone, but she insisted against it. So I reluctantly knocked and shouted the usual hello. After no response, we slowly turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. What we saw next was straight out of a horror movie. The room looked terrible, as if someone had just gone crazy hitting random areas with an axe. That's when we noticed Jennifer lying on the floor face down. We walked over to her, thinking that Jim had knocked her unconscious. But as we got closer, we realized there was fresh blood staining the carpet underneath her. In complete horror, we called the cops immediately. We explained to them that we believed we had just walked into a murder scene, but that the murderer himself had already left. The police would tell us to leave the room and wait outside until they arrived. And sure enough, they would arrive not even 5 minutes later. After explaining everything that happened that night, the cops set out a search for Jim. And luckily, they were able to find him around an hour later, still running down the street. After further talking with the cops, they said it looked like Jim was trying to find a gas station so that he could get fuel to help him burn the whole house down, with the goal of burning Jennifer's dead body inside. This in turn would remove all evidence connecting him to the murder.
Yeah, he's insane.
Jim would ultimately be convicted with the murder of his own wife. For the next couple of days, both me and my wife couldn't leave the house, as every time we tried, we would be swarmed by different news reporters asking us for an interview. Me and my wife would of course move out as soon as we found the funds to do so. But still, the whole thing was insanely terrifying. I mean, in the middle of the night, we had unknowingly come face to face with a man who had just murdered his own wife, and who was ultimately planning to murder us in the process of destroying the evidence.
Yeah, he didn't care if he torched the place down and left you guys inside, or the other tenants. He just wanted to get rid of the body of her. But I thought it was like the way the story was going that it might have been two of them, teaming up to do something. But no, I figured it had to be like a, husband and wife quarrel until finally they heard him that night killing her. But then the dude, if he wanted not to get caught, he should have not broken into their room, try to steal their keys. But then they probably wouldn't discover her body until the next morning if he did not, succeed in burning it down, that is. But, I'm sorry to this couple that they had to go through, like, the whole news reporter thing. I mean, like, I know they're just trying to look for answers and everything, but they should get all that information from the police, not the citizens.
This happened 2 years ago, when I was working for a very large carpet cleaning company. It's exactly what you'd expect. I'd spend the whole workday going from house to house, completely deep cleaning the residents' carpets with a lot of different tools and machinery. I was 22 and a female. I'm actually pretty sure I was one of the only females working for this company. But at the same time, I really enjoyed it, and if I'm being honest, I was actually really good at the job. So, because of this, I was given a lot of work and would usually hit between 6 to 8 houses daily, driving all across multiple towns. This night, I was working late, as one of the houses I cleaned earlier in the day took way longer than expected, which of course sent me back the rest of the day. I'd say it was around 7 p.m. when I had one house left to do for the day. Though, upon arrival at the given address, I quickly realized it was in the middle of nowhere. And after knocking on the front door, I also realized no one was home. I was annoyed, yeah, but realistically, I was the one that was late for the appointment. I decided to wait until someone came home, as I knew I'd get chewed out by my boss if I left without cleaning anything. And luckily, 10 minutes later, the resident pulled up next to my van. He was a middle-aged man, balding, wearing dirty shorts and a jacket. He honestly seemed a bit awkward, but was apologetic and let me into his house with all my needed equipment. Upon entering, I instantly realized the carpet and just the house in general was already unbelievably clean. I mean, it even smelled like cleaning supplies had just been used. To be honest, it was a little weird. I wasn't used to seeing already clean carpets upon arrival. I was genuinely questioning whether me cleaning them would even make a difference.
No, he probably contacted you to clean over what he just cleaned. Like, blood or any other bodily fluids, or basically he tried to clean up a murder scene. I bet you he's the murderer, too.
But regardless, I followed protocol and pulled out my company laptop to calculate how much it was going to cost before starting. Hey, do they keep track of where you are on that thing? His question caught me off guard. That was an immediate red flag. After the initial shock from the question, I replied saying that it did, and that my boss knew exactly how long each job should take. In reality, this was a complete lie. The laptop was literally just used to run a program that can calculate how much to charge a customer based on the inputted amount of work. But I felt like I had to lie, as there was definitely something off about this guy. Regardless, I started cleaning. I just figured the quicker I could clean these carpets, and the quicker I could get out of here and call it a day. Fast forward around an hour later, and I was finished. I hastily met up with the guy to explain I was done and how much he owed me. But before I could, he interrupted me. He asked me if I could also clean his basement carpets, as he forgot to list them when he ordered the service. My heart literally dropped. I just wanted to be done with this and get out of here. But my stupid customer service conditioned brain couldn't figure out how to get away with saying no. The guy led me to his basement door, opened it, and gave me a hand signal as if to gesture that I was to go down first. I hesitated, but ultimately I did. Once I got to the bottom, I was horrified. The basement looked horrible compared to the rest of the house. Not only was it unfinished with no carpet whatsoever, but there were clearly 7 deep freezers lining the walls. In the middle of the room was a lit, low-hanging ceiling light revealing an old television set, VHS tapes scattered all over the floor, and an old recliner facing the TV. Behind the set were 2 white shelves full of VHS tapes. The whole while I'm looking at the basement, the guy stood at the top of the steps blocking the doorway with a disturbing smile on his face. I looked up at him and said, yeah man, let me go get my stuff. With absolutely no intention of cleaning anything, I just wanted to get out of there. I held my breath and began to walk back up the stairs. The whole while, all I could hear was my own heartbeat in my ears. But as I got to about the 3rd stair from the top, the guy was still blocking the door, with still that disturbing smile on his face. I stood there for maybe 12
probably
seconds,
don't want you to leave
just
now.
looking at the guy, waiting for him to get out of the way. When, I swear, I could hear footsteps in the basement behind me. Out of pure instinct and adrenaline, without even looking back, I charged towards the guy in front of me. Luckily, I was able to break past him, and right as I did, I beelined it out of the front door and into my van parked outside.
There you go.
I was leaving thousands of dollars of cleaning equipment behind. But honestly, in that moment, I didn't care. I legitimately felt like my life was in danger. As I was pulling away, I glanced back at the house one last time, and I saw the same man looking out one of the windows, now with no smile on his face, but rather a cold, hard stare. I thought I could see another person, but I honestly don't know. The whole memory is sort of just a blur. The truth of the matter is that my boss would not have noticed I was missing for at least 24 hours when I didn't show up for my shift the next day. The next morning, I would call my boss, tell him everything, and ultimately quit that very day. As far as I know, they got the police involved, but I try to distance myself from the whole situation, so I really don't know what ended up happening. I suffered PTSD over this experience. That day still haunts me, and to this day, I can't explain what I found in that basement or the sounds of footsteps I thought to have heard behind me. But one thing's for certain. I believe that man, and whoever else was there, had planned to kill me that night for some sick reason or another.
Well, I'm glad you got out of there, and I'm with you. I'd be like, if I was in danger and I was cleaning houses, I don't care about the equipment no more. I just bolt and get out of there. But she says she saw freezers, and I bet you there was some dead corpses in there from other people that murdered. That's going to be it for now. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those post notifications for more chill and scare content like this. As always, this has been another successful installment of the Tin Man's Corner channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor. I say that's a wrap, and have a nice day, everybody.